Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Performance Podcast. It's me, Will. Just giving you a little intro on this one. We got one of our all-time top guests, smartest guy ever on this one, Josh Hankin, on the podcast. He's going to be on the next two, and I would encourage you guys to listen to both. The first one's a pretty much a roundtable where we're discussing some trends we're seeing in fitness and ways people are training and just like the merits of that. So we had this idea to do a little more of a roundtable because Coach Dose and I were recently a part of a roundtable for Perform Better. And we really loved the format of how that worked out. And just we were on a roundtable with Greg Rose and Mark Verstegen and Coach Dose and I. And it was just incredible. That was a super fun time. So we liked that idea. So we brought Josh on, who's great, smart on all sorts of topics, one of the most intelligent guys out there training people. And we brought him on and we just talked about some topics. The second part, which will come out next week, is I recently hired Josh to help me with one of my weightlifters who was having some pain and some movement dysfunction, and went to Josh and we just talk about how he and his wife Jess, who run DVRT, addressed all that. So I was super impressed with everything Josh did. So that's going to be covered in the next episode. Today is going to be a really cool roundtable, me and Josh and Coach Dose talking about training. So I hope you guys will stick around, listen to this, and we will have Josh Hankin and Coach Dose and I after the break. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Performance Podcast. It's me, Will. I'm here with Coach Dose and basically one of our Hall of Fame guests at this point. We got Josh Hankin here as well.
Thanks, guys. I feel like I'm the Steve Buscemi in your guys' like Adam Sandler movies. I keep popping up and no one knows why.
You're like, that guy, that's the guy from the Sandler movie.
Yeah. You're not even, what if we said you're not even Buscemi? You're the guy who
Oh, wow.
in Waterboy.
There you go. That's probably more appropriate.
Which guy are you referring to in Waterboy?
The guy who played Farmer Fran.
Oh yeah, who's in every movie by the way.
Who's in every movie, right?
And you don't know why, right?
Yeah. But he's memorable. That's for certain, right?
Yeah. Farmer Fran. Just the fact that you remember that.
Yeah.
I think that sets the tone for this conversation.
Yeah. I think his name is Jack Garaputo. Okay. Dose, we just wanted to do a roundtable. It's kind of the idea that we had recently did a Perform Better talk, right, about power.
Yeah.
Like the idea of a roundtable, it worked really well. So less of an interview with Josh, but more of us just hitting a discussion on a couple topics that we have found to be pretty current right now.
Yeah, not quite as organized as the Perform Better one.
Yeah,
where we have all the questions sitting there ready. We just have been bouncing around some topics, and we go back and forth and text and things like that during the week. But there's lots of things that we could talk about. We could talk about like programming. We could talk about like laying out the design for performance. Like what would make sense and what would be kind of contraindicated. And I think my first question was that I thought we could bounce around was kind of the re-emergence of unstable surface training, right? So like the stuff that we're seeing, whether it's on a BOSU or a single leg, barefoot, kind of hinging row kind of thing. I mean, we've gone through this, right? I feel like we've been to this movie before. Talk about it being like a pendulum that swings, but Cosgrove talks about it being like a turntable, right? So it'll come back around at some point. And then what did we do with that stuff back in the early 2000s or whatever? We threw it out, we mocked it, we made fun of it, and then everybody started lifting heavy shit again, right? Like we went through that. And then now it seems like we've gotten away from that again, from the tradition, if you want to call it traditional training, but like the overload to now going to, well, I can feel like maybe the central nervous system's getting overloaded, right? Maybe that's what's happening. And so that makes things really difficult. If it's hard for me to balance in a single leg, it must be really good for me, right? That makes sense?
Yeah.
So what's your take on that? Like, you think what's driving people to that, I guess? Like, is it the allure of doing something that's maybe not that hard, but feels hard? So therefore it probably would be good for your goals.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first. Always go. After dose.
Yeah, I think it's twofold. I think you have on one hand people that constantly, this industry attracts new people. They come in and they don't know how to program. They don't know how to progress. So then they default to, when you can't go heavier any longer because you're just trying to go heavier and heavier, or do more and more reps. They don't know what else to progress. So they default to, well, this is really hard, like you said. So I'm going to do unstable surface training or unstable training. And it's not just unstable surface training. I think it's even the barbells that bounce violently as you're trying to lift them and things like that. And
So I guess you could go unstable surface / like
instability.
The implement itself. Like when you see people hook up the kettlebells to the super bands on the end of the bars. And I always think one of those things is just going to take somebody's, ribs out or knees out or something when they're doing stuff. But keep going, Josh.
Well, no, I mean, and someone who has a piece of equipment that's unstable, I can speak to this, that all the research points to the problem with unstable surface training is the same problem with those barbells and kettlebells, is that it's too drastically unstable. And therefore, I think you said off before we started, like it shuts down the nervous system a bit because it tries to protect itself. Therefore, we can't have much expression of force. So therefore, what are we really building? So I think it's on one hand, people not knowing how to progress. They don't know actually what this is accomplishing, other than it's very difficult. And then you have on the other side, I think it's the social media influence. I need content. I need something cool to show people. So I'm going to post this and people are going to think it's cool because it looks different and hard and so forth. So I think it's people sacrificing those things because they don't know actually what they're trying to achieve, and they don't know the basic idea of what stability is supposed to be about. Therefore, they default to these things they think is stability and really has very little relevance to actual stability training.
Well, I think that's a good point, Josh. And I think a lot of the stuff when you and Jess post stuff, we often focus on the stability aspect of a lot of those movements. So how would you? Like, how would you define for people listening? Like you say, like people say the importance of stability, or let's create tension and stability, right? Like, how would you define that if you're trying to tell somebody versus the stability you're doing in some of your ultimate sandbag movements to some of the things that we're talking about right now? Like, what would be like the biggest kind of philosophical difference there?
Well, I still Brandon's quote, right? Brandon, I think Marcelo said best. He's like, stability is about muscle sequencing and timing. So now you're talking more motor control qualities. And the motor control is basically those very things, like how does our body use muscles in motion? How do we all know we have chains, but are those muscles firing in the chains correctly at the right time and so forth? That's, goes back to speed development, as you guys are really experts in, or as Will knows, power development. Like if you don't have that right firing sequence, you could have the strongest muscle in the world, but it can't express the force the right way. So I think, that's where people misunderstand, what stability is supposed to be about, because stability is supposed to improve those qualities of, getting those muscles to work in the right chains, right, with the other muscles, and getting to work at the right time. And that becomes motor control. And that's why we focus on, that's the essence of why we're supposed to be focusing. I think those you and I talked about before, movement over muscles. The idea of our movement was this idea of motor control, but yet that's an abstract idea from most coaches. And so they default to muscles again when they're talking about exercise. So I think that's the, disconnect we have. So in our system, that's why we change body position or load position, because we're trying to challenge, after we establish the proficiency in those movement patterns, how can you able to control that in different environments? And that's, I think, goes back to a quote that Dr. Mel Siff used about strength. He's like, strength isn't the ability to express force. Strength is the ability to express force under different environments or circumstances. And so that's a big caveat to the idea of what we think of strength, I believe.
So one of the things I was kind of thinking about is like stability training versus like unstable surface, right? It is good to train things to be stable, right? But then you take it like the next step and you end up with that unstable surface stuff. I coach out of like kind of a box gym, and you see people come in all the time who are like new trainers, And, you know, the same stuff that we saw 20 years ago just pops up, right? It's like the BOSU ball comes out, the stability ball comes out, all that kind of stuff. And so I do attribute it to Instagram. I attribute it to just like not knowing, right? And but if we actually talk about some of the literature, is it more true that unstable surface is pretty poor method for lower body strength, but can be indicated for like upper body type stuff? Wasn't that the basis of isn't that the basis of like what Eric Cressy's like master's thesis was about? Like that's how I first heard of Cressy, was because he had like the truth about unstable surface training 15 years ago or something.
Some of the stuff I've seen with that premise was more like unilateral stuff, being obviously more like a bench press, like a dumbbell bench press versus like a barbell bench press, right?
Yeah, and I mean,
so that led.
There's probably a limit.
You need
right?
Yeah,
like one arm dumbbell bench press might have some greater kind of recruitment patterns, but then if you do like something totally off the wall, like while laying on a stability ball plus, feet, one leg or something, then yeah. I mean, at some point you're going to kind of shut everything down. Right. But that was kind of isn't that one of the kind of principles behind a TRX, right? We might do push-ups in a TRX, right? But we're probably not going to do squats with our feet in the TRX, right?
I love that. Yeah.
That's frontal to do that.
Just don't give people any ideas.
Yeah. But
that goes to what we were talking about, like the incremental level of it, right? You wouldn't take a beginner and give 50 pounds to squat with. The next set, give them 500 pounds.
Yeah.
But that's what people are doing to people's stability all the time.
Well, I'll make a confession. Tell me if I'm like doing the wrong thing, right? I have my kid who just like went to that international meet and got medals, right? He tends to be a little weak he tends to be unstable overhead. And this week I had him do the overhead squats with the kettlebells hanging off the bands on a bar, right? I have used that to some effect, I think, but I don't know if it's a real effect. I don't know if it's like a mental effect, because by going through the motion of doing something like that, then my athletes go, man, I feel a lot stronger overhead. But I do hear that, but I don't know if in truth they are stronger overhead. Does that make sense?
I got a thought about that, but I'll let those go first if you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably might be going the same shit with this one. I guess the question that you would lay out there would be, is that unstable situation that with you having the kid do X amount of load and sets with the kettlebells, is that better than just putting a load and having him work the real like the actual stability he's going to be going through with different loads? I don't know. Like, it's like trying to, like work on your jump training in sand versus on the, you're going to get some things about it, but is it really going to increase your force production when you put your feet on the basketball court? Like, I don't know. Like, I'm just spitballing there. What do you think?
Well, I have a funny story about this. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Well, to be fair to myself, it's like the last thing we would do on a day as a piece of the accessories, right? We might do, it's not like we're building a workout around it. It's as if, for him, we already did snatch balances this week. And then, this is like day 3. It's his like least intense day, and we throw it at the end of the workout, right? So it's like, what does that really have a large training effect, or am I just subconsciously throwing it there to give the kid some confidence overhead? I don't really know, that I was legitimately asking you guys what you think. What were you going to say, Josh?
Well, I was to say, I have a funny story about that, because I think I told Dose this a couple of years ago when I was speaking at NSTA. I did a presentation on stability, and I have a like, on my PowerPoint presentation or a clip from a study about putting bands on a bench press, right? Or hang kettlebells from a bench, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this isn't really like typical what we're looking for stability. And of course, the guy who did the papers in the audience, right? So like he comes up to me afterwards. He's like, and so we had an interesting chat about it. And he's like, they saw a positive improvement from their bench from doing that. And I said, well, see, then we get into really interesting discussions. So what Will's saying is he's trying to build stability for a specific task, right? So then we have to think about what's involved in that task and then what could be energy leaks that causing instability. So for example, in this young man, he could not know how to brace his trunk really hard when he's doing an overhead squat, right? So you could have actually solved an issue if the bands caused him to reflexively brace harder during the overhead squat. That would give him stability for that movement. So in a way, that could be potentially a fix, right? You're using an external, stimulus to teach him how to brace harder. And therefore, he's gaining more stability, trunk stability. Therefore, he can overhead squat better. That would be good. But then to Dose's point, would that make him then run faster or do other things? I don't know. But that's your goal, is to get him better at a specific task. So does that make sense? Like, I think you could have an actual solution. But if I tried to apply that to general stability, I don't know, right? Like, I guess I would also ask for the young man, like, where is he having instability in that movement? And if you identified trunk stability and you thought this was a solution, then that kind of makes sense to me. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, your explanation makes sense. That you could find like anything, we could probably find a reasonable use for a lot of different exercises if we have a very specific target goal, right? But trying to create a program around it, or mistakenly thinking that might be the force producing part of your program, that would be a bad idea, right? We probably are not going
or your whole program, because I think a lot of people actually will create an entire program for a client based around that.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So like if you have a very specific thing, you could find a way that using something that, let's not even call it unstable surface, just that kind of general stability kind of thing, that could lend a hand in getting a very specific task completed, right? But yeah, it shouldn't be a huge part of your program.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that's pretty spot on. Hey, so I was just thinking about this. There's so much shit going through my head. I think, Josh, you sent me some stuff. I saw some stuff on the internet of people starting to do train like different things with like their heels elevated. So like we went from like elevating the heels of the wedge, right? We've been through this movie before, but now like their forefoot on a block while they're squatting,
like toes.
So the heels the heels are elevated off the ground. So they're doing stuff like on their foot. So they're having to like almost kind of do that plantar flexion the whole time as they're squatting, or like a lunge. They step in a lunge and the forefoot only is on. So the heel's kind of in limbo. You guys seen that?
Yeah.
I don't know what the premise would be. The other thing, as somebody who's flat footed and has had crazy plantar fasciitis before, this one scares the shit out of me. Have you ever seen when they put two blocks like this and foot so that there's nothing under the middle of their foot, so that their toes are on the block and their back of the heels on the block, and now they're squatting or doing something with the foot like a hammock.
Oh,
right. Any podiatrist?
I thought the goal was to see who could blow out their plantar fascia the fastest.
I mean, to me, doesn't that just seem like, if you've ever had it, it's just awful, right? To have plantar fasciitis, it's just you have your ice water bottles that you put in the freezer and you roll them out in the morning and night. You stretch them, you heat them. You have orthotics. Like, it's just insane to think that we're going to actually mess with that now. Like making your foot a hammock is pretty weird. But just the idea, maybe what do you guys think's going on there with the heels elevated, but not like wedge elevated? They're unsupported completely. And I don't know, have you ever seen that, Will? Have you seen any of that?
Well, I would say, okay, so really, this was actually going to be something I want to talk about. on the unstable stuff was like kind of barefoot, like training barefoot more often, I think is like, we'll warm up barefoot. If we have turf, we'll go through that. If we're doing some accessories that, we're kind of, I like to be barefoot. I have messed around with an idea of like active foot. Have you ever heard somebody say that? Where like I'm trying to like put my ball of my foot on the ground and hold an arch and stuff like that. Maybe as how you might strike the ground athletically, right? Where it's like not actively plantar flex, but like hold a dorsiflexion with just the ball of my foot hitting the ground. Does that, like how you would hear someone talk about striking the ground while they sprint, right? I've messed with that kind of stuff. And I heard that, I don't know, some strength coaches were talking about that. And so I've messed with it. I like the way it feels for my feet when I do that, when I actively dorsiflex and put the ball of my foot on the ground. I might do that if I'm working out and like doing lunging or something like that. But I have not seen anybody then elevate the foot on the block. But I think that active foot thing is like a very big Cal Dietz thing. He talks about that, or I've seen him, I think a Cal Dietz-ite was someone who exposed me to that idea. I don't know if you guys think it has any validity.
Yeah,
I think the blocks
it makes sense now, because maybe that's what they're doing when I see that.
Yeah.
Maybe they're taking that to like another level. And I don't know if Cal would be doing that, but
I don't have a clue. I have never seen him speak on that. I have just seen others that I know who have, anyways. So I just mess with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think people misunderstand like a lot of the foot mechanics stuff, because I mean, if you look at the literature, basically what people are trying to do, I don't know if this is going to be audio, so this may be a pointless demonstration, but like, you have the core of the foot, which is basically like the 2 points on either end of the ball foot and then at the heel. So they draw sort of like this diagonal diagram. And so the whole point is like, I think Will started mentioning it, like you want to create that active arch, but that's way different than me trying to squat with a load on the ball of my foot. Like I could just try to grab the ground of the foot where that's very different than I'm elevating stuff, because now you're increasing the stress exponentially. I think what's dangerous about it is people don't know how much stress they're increasing.
Yeah.
Right. Like you don't, like I think Dose, you and I talked about when we were doing the heels elevated thing, like, what do you know how much actual load you're putting through that structure when you do that? Because you could easily be exceeding the tolerance of that individual versus like, I like to do stuff just like, I don't know, something crazy like jump rope, and teach people to use their feet. I mean, what a novel idea, right? But yet like people can't jump rope, but we want to do that, to me, I think it's just misunderstanding a concept. I think, what you and Will are talking about makes sense and having active foot, but when you start doing load and dynamic movements under load, I think that changes the game completely for people, especially if you're talking general pop, who is more deconditioned than a lot of the athletes, that people are dealing with that have like terrible, like strength in their feet. And then you go to that, like, I think that just blows people up.
Yeah. I think going back to what Will said about the barefoot stuff, I think there's a lot of, benefit in that too. I mean, for myself, who had a lot of foot issues with that really fat foot, you should have seen back in the days, like what a wet footprint of mine looked like. It literally looked like Sasquatch. There was like no, the whole hang ten, like feet with a little arch thing. There was nothing. It was just like a blob. And now I actually have something there. But I was wearing, I started wearing like Vibrams way back, right? All that minimalist stuff. And then just started going with nothing. And like, it's funny that you said that, Josh, but I jump rope all the time barefooted on concrete in my garage. Like it doesn't bother me at all. I just feel like I have so much strength in where I had none before, with that. But that's a long progression of like barefoot stuff and loading stuff and doing carries barefoot.
Well, something like I love to do is like, I mean, you just made me think of it was like, I'll do it because my feet are so shot from basketball. Like I'll do carries on a balance beam, not like a really tall one, but a really small one. And then you have to use your feet a lot.
Yeah.
Especially because you're, reducing your base support so much. So, I mean, like, I think if like, before I would even contemplate doing this stuff that you're mentioning, like where people are like doing this on squats and lunges, I would just be doing that stuff. I think that stuff is way more beneficial and builds stability for a lot of people in their lower extremity.
Yeah, that's a good point too, Josh, with the carries, because a lot of people just carry, and then I've always talked about like turning while you're carrying, right? Like doing figure eight. was doing. But if you just like get a line on the ground, like I have one in the middle of my garage, and just try to walk that like a balance beam, like a tightrope, it changes everything with the foot, especially when you're barefooted, man. And you don't have the danger of, don't get on your wall or something and try that stuff. But that would be another issue with the feet. And then it's funny because last week we had Todd Wright on, and so we talked a lot about the foot and its influence. But I'm going to shift gears real quick. And another thing that I see out there, and I had a few examples, I think, when the last masterclass that we did, Will, of some of the stuff we're seeing in the guise of power, like let's create powerful athletes. And then all the demonstration of exercises are very unloaded. And we already know, you can get great power, like doing plyometrics, right? And, plyo push-ups, those are great. But they're more or less like the obsession with like doing things from a split base and changing the split, or doing a 90-degree turn. A lot of times they're incorporating like a landmine. What's your take on that? Like, obviously, we went through this with the roundtable, the meeting of the minds, Will. We started talking about like the equations, right? So there's definitely a loading factor there. We can increase the power by moving further, jumping higher, that kind of stuff. Like just like looking what I just said, like the Valerie Allman stuff. Like the power is just insane, right? For somebody that size to create that much power and the vertical jump and everything else. So we know that there's a lot of loading in our programs, a lot of plyos and a lot of throwing and things like that, medicine balls, right? Mm-hmm. I don't imagine she's doing the snatches with the landmine to the right side of her and things like that. Like, what's your take on that? Obviously from Will with your weightlifting stuff, I don't think you'd see any application for that unloaded stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of
turning, twisting, jumping, twitchy.
You want to kind of train across the spectrum, right? You want to have some unloaded stuff, but you want to have some weighted stuff. And if you build your power program around all unloaded stuff, you're going to have people who are quick and weak, right? I think that, again, so much of this is like Instagram, right? Like, how would you have a platform to share your bad exercises 20 years ago? Like, I mean, you'd have to like go through the trouble of making an at-home video, or right? I mean, like, get published in. Men's Health probably had a couple whiffs at one point or another, right? With like people they publish in there, but like, honestly, how would you have done it? Right. Cause like 20 years ago I read, or I guess, let's say 16 years ago, I read like Vern Gambetta's book, his like, what was Vern Gambetta's like first book? It was not functional, it was like sports performance. Right.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And then I read Jimmy Radcliffe's book about plyometrics, high power plyometrics. Right. I read your book shortly after, maybe 2008 or something like that, in power training. Mark Verstegen's book. I didn't have any internet information, so I didn't get any bad stuff. I mean, I guess I could have picked up the wrong book, but like, I just think that stuff just all was propagated by the fact that information can be shared so quickly.
Yeah, the platforms there now.
Right. I mean, that's a totally different question. Maybe we can talk about that as like old men sitting on the porch yelling at things. But I just think that, you take a good athlete, right? That guy who used to train Antonio Brown was like the king of that, right? He would like take Antonio Brown, make him do a silly exercise and say, this is how I train Antonio Brown. It's like, well, Antonio Brown seems to be good in spite of everything in his life, right? Like, he will still be a good athlete. He will still be a great receiver. It wasn't because you did 90-degree rotating split box jumps, over a dog or something, right? Like, so you probably need all that, right? You need some load, you need some twitchiness, you need the unloaded stuff. You need long contacts, you need short contacts, right? So,
yeah, I think in general that my biggest problem is I think the premise for that stuff is that kind of like the faster you move, the faster you're going to get, right? The quicker I can press out this landmine and get to a split and get under it real quick, right? Like that somehow is an indicator like, ooh, look at that guy. He's twitchy as AF, right? Like, but it doesn't, like a vertical jump or something to me is like a pretty good indicator of your power.
Yeah.
Especially if you're a 250-pound linebacker and you got a 35-inch vertical jump, like you don't want to run into that guy, you know. But at the same time, a lot goes into that guy's training. That's, you know, he's in the weight room and he's doing his plyos and he's doing his football stuff, obviously. So I don't know. I think a lot of this stuff, it's I just want to say it why I think it's out there. The unstable surface, the fast twitchy quarter turn, 180-degree stuff, the landmine stuff. It's easier. So like, I keep coming back to that as, you know, we look for the path of least resistance as human beings in just about everything. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing in training is, you know, I just posted a thing in a story yesterday on overload.
Yeah.
And just going back to like, can we just get back to some of this, like exercise physics 101, specificity and overload? I mean, it's not that crazy. It's not, you know, it might be crazy now because it's hard. And I think that's the problem is that people will go, oh, it's old. It's too, you know, you're fixated on the box, you know, but there's a lot of good shit in the box. There really is. You know, I just don't know if we want to take the time to put the effort in the training anymore in the box, you know?
Or you got to be like Brad Pitt, right? You got to know what's in the box first.
Yeah. What's in the box?
But I mean, I want to pose something to you guys because I think you guys both made me think of it. I think on one hand, when you ask what is a dose, I think people don't know what athleticism is. And maybe there's something you and Will can talk to because I think they want to do athletic training and they don't know what that means. And they think that's just athletic. We were talking before we started about running, like how people discover sprinting and they're like amazed by it. And I think the same thing with jumping. Like they discover jumping. Oh, look, I look like an athlete. So I think there's a large part of that. And I think the other thing is, I think they look at, let's say, a jump and they think, let's say, you know, this maybe for Will to address, they think that's more power than a clean or a snatch. Right. I think in their head, they see, oh, I don't move as fast when I'm doing a clean or snatch as I do when someone's jumping. I think I think this thing where it's non-loaded, so therefore it's not dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. Like I'm jumping dangerous because I'm not loaded, even though they don't realize the amount of force that's coming down upon their body when they do it. So, I mean, I think those are things maybe you guys could speak to, because I think I keep hearing a lot of recently, oh, I'm training athleticism. I'm like, how do you define that? Like, what does that mean? But I also think there's a lot of, you know, I think Alan talks about like demonstrations of power rather than like people actually building power in their workouts.
Yeah.
Right. It's like demonstrating, you know, a pistol jump up onto a table.
Right.
Okay. And, you know, that's a demonstration. It's an impressive one, but is that a product of like the training, right, that you're promoting or whatever?
But could you guys like address like the athleticism and the like, oh, I create more power jumping than I would like maybe doing Olympic lifts?
Well, it's funny because when you said that, it brought me back to listening to Dr. John Garhammer years ago, talking about the research that they had been doing on the forces, the landing forces, with somebody power cleaning 300 pounds and then just landing off of a vertical jump. And the landing, like there was more requirements for force reduction from the jump versus somebody with all that load catching it. People go, oh, it's crazy. 300 pounds plus his body and all that kind of stuff. But people don't quite realize how much is involved in running, right? The forces that are involved with that, the impact and the absorption and the production, and then just landing. That's why it's always funny. It takes me back to the examples I give of people freaking out about kids lifting weights, right? Oh my God, you're going to destroy their force plates. I mean, like go to the park and watch these little psychos jumping off at the highest point of the swing and landing, stick landing, and jumping off the top of doing a flip off the monkey bars and landing. Like there's nothing in the world that we could possibly put on their shoulders that they could actually squat that could come close to the thousands of pounds of violent force that kid just absorbed as he landed on maybe sand or maybe, sawdust or whatever they're putting in those things. That's just rubber nowadays, I guess. I age myself with the sawdust thing. But yeah, I think.
1 second. I got a kid yelling at me.
Okay.
I'll restart.
I'll keep going with Josh. I think when we talk about athleticism, I think that's kind of a catchphrase now, right? Like everybody wants to be an athlete. And we were talking off air about a lot of the stuff we see with people really being fascinated and starting to prescribe sprinting to their clients. And it's like, you just discovered sprinting now. Like it's 2021, and the joke that I made was, tell me you've never been an athlete without telling me you've never been an athlete. I think that, yeah, there's so many benefits to sprinting. If you haven't sprinted in a while, which I haven't, and I would go out and go do that or do some sprints up my steep hill here. The next day you start feeling stuff that you haven't felt, in years. So I get it. There's a lot going on there, but the term athleticism is, I don't know if I want to say it's loaded, but it's probably misunderstood, right? Almost like functional training. You say like athletic training, athleticism based training. What does that mean? It's like, it's kind of cool to say, but how are you defining that? I think we know what a good athlete is when we see one, right? We can see the qualities that they have, but in terms of like saying like a program is training athleticism, it would have to be pretty comprehensive. I think you'd have a lot in there.
It's not just jumping and running.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we talk about this all the time with Will's sport is weightlifting, and so, I always poke fun and I'll say, sagittal man, he's like a robotic, I'll do like Mr. Roboto thing, but like, that's the sport, right? So that's the sport and what they do. And that's the movement plane in which they need to create all that force.
Okay, everybody, that is it for this episode. I know we cut off right there. This episode ended up, it was supposed to be one episode, ended up being recorded for almost an hour. So we split it up into a pretty good cut point right there. We will pick up next week. If you're a weightlifter or coach weightlifters, this is going to be huge. It's a big discussion about some of the movement dysfunction that you're commonly going to see in weightlifters, even really good ones. So Josh has helped me out big time with Coach Mary, who is one of my best weightlifters, and she has some issues that we're trying to work on, and so we talk about those and how to look at them and diagnose them pretty simply. So super awesome episode. Hope to see you guys next week.